Hi, friends. I'm back again. This time we're looking at Unit 6, Lesson 3. This one's going to be a long one too, so go ahead and feel free to pause the video whenever you need to take a break, okay? The things we're going to focus on today, we are going to preview our new text, which is called The War of 1812. And then we're also going to look at reading and writing words with the EA spelling. And typically the EA spelling for us, we've been practicing says E, but there are also words where it says the eh sound. So today EA, we're going to practice making that short eh sound. So let's look at EA here real quick. We have already learned that the EA spelling can stand for E, like eagle, beast, mean, easy, scream, and even Easter. But today we're going to learn a new sound, and that is that EA can also say eh. Here's some examples of the eh sound. Something like pet or get dressed, set. That's all single E saying eh, okay? Unfortunately, we don't have our spelling words, or our spelling tree, so we can't do our leaves. But let's look at the power bar here for EA and looking at the fact that power bar is not really big. Okay, it's not very often that you're going to see EA saying the eh sound, as in head. Okay, let's practice this real quick. Worksheet 3.1 is on page 17, and I'll read the directions for you real quick. Again, after this, after the directions, feel free to pause, work on it for a little while, and then come back and we can look at the reader together. So the directions say to use the best word from the box to complete each sentence. I'm going to read these words for you. Thread, spread, meant, dead, bread, breakfast, feather, dread, head, and lead. Okay, it can be confusing because remember, we practiced EA saying E as well, and some of these words can say that too. So go ahead and read through these sentences and figure out which one makes the most sense. You only have to do the front page today. There's no back, all right? So go ahead and pause the video and get started on that. And then when you come back, we will talk about our reader. Okay, so our reader today, our reader is talking about the War of 1812. I'm hoping that when I said that, that was ringing some bells for some of you, because the War of 1812 is something we've already studied in knowledge. So this isn't going to be new for you. There's going to be a lot of review material. However, our reader here is going to be a lot more difficult than some of the other readers that we've been working through. Okay, there's going to be a lot of words that you're really going to have to use some of those skills that we've been practicing. So expect that when we're working through this. We also have been talking this week about different genres, fiction versus nonfiction, and this is our first nonfiction reader. Remember, nonfiction means that you are going to get facts in this book. Okay, you're going to get factual information. Again, nonfiction means that the story is true and what is being written is something that actually happened. Okay, something that really did happen means nonfiction. This reader actually describes a war that happened a long time ago in the year of 1812. Okay, this was the year that the United States was working to gain their freedom from Great Britain. We were a young country then, not very old at all. We had the 13 colonies, and we were battling against Great Britain because we didn't want to be under their control anymore. So when we were doing our knowledge lesson on the War of 1812, we learned a lot of information, and it's going to be similar to, well, I shouldn't say similar to, but familiar anyway, to what you're going to be reading in this reader. So let's look at the cover of the reader. And I want you to tell me or think in your head, what do you notice about the cover of the illustration? And I know it's kind of hard for you to see here. So I'm going to bring my Elmo back up and um, hopefully that'll be a little bit easier for you all to see. Yeah, that's much better. So this picture might even look familiar to you, but you can tell by based on the way that the men are dressed on the cover that this took place a long time ago, right? The men on the boat, you can see there's a younger boy resting his arm on a cannon. That was a type of weapon that they used then. You can see that the men are wearing top coats and ruffled shirts with buttons. This, since we see the cannon, was probably a warship, and the men seem to be looking out at the land and looking towards an American flag. If you remember, this person's name was Francis Scott Key, and the American flag was very important to him. Hopefully, that's kind of giving you some hints as to what he did that was so important. So now let's turn to the table of contents here and see how many chapters we have in this book. Okay, so here's the table of contents, and it looks like we have about 13 chapters, and then you notice that there's a glossary down here at the bottom. Okay, if you remember, the table of contents is helpful because it tells you where chapters start. So if Mrs. Kittleson was to say, okay, I would like you to read A Famous Ship, chapter 4 on your own, then you would say, oh, okay, she wants me to start on page 38. Okay, so that's why we think that these table of contents are so important and so helpful because it helps you to quickly find where you're supposed to go. I mentioned the glossary down here, and the glossary shows up at the end of the book. So I'm just going to flip to that real quick. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to give you all a copy of this book, but you do have it online. And if you scroll all the way to the back, you're going to find this glossary. Okay. So you see anthem and army, branch. And the way that these words are organized is alphabetical order, which we spent a lot of time on earlier in the year. So if I said, let's see, Ava, can you tell me what does British, who are the British? What is that about? Then she would look in the B section, find British. Oh, and it gives you a definition. British mean people who are from Great Britain. Okay, so whenever you find yourself getting stuck on a word that maybe you don't know what it means, you can flip back to this glossary and it can kind of help you. I see a word right away here that we have not used in class, and that's called gallantly. And gallantly means impressive. Okay, something has happened that's very impressive. So definitely use this glossary if you're finding that some of the words are confusing or you don't know what they mean. Okay, that's why they have it in here. Lots of nonfiction books such as this have glossaries to help the reader. Okay, so let's skip here something a little bit different that we didn't have in our other stories. And I'm going to try to zoom in on one picture at a time if I can. Close, anyway. So we're going to do a little introduction to the War of 1812, but there's not a whole lot of text for us to read. It's kind of just a discussion of the images that we see. So we were a new nation after the War of 1812. It's when we gained our independence. Remember that the United States, as we know it today, did not exist before this. Okay, it was just a chunk of land that no one had ever discovered. So, excuse me, sorry about that. So this image shows the continents of North America. That's us right here, and also Europe. Okay, and Europe has the two countries of Great Britain and France. And remember, a long time ago, the country that we live in was not actually divided into 50 separate states. Native Americans lived throughout our country, and it was not nearly as populated as it is today. Okay. Um, Also want you to notice this is not labeled, but this is the Atlantic Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean divides the United States from Great Britain and France. If you remember from our knowledge stories, we had a good partnership with Great Britain and France in the beginning because we used them all as trading partners. And then there happened to be a little disagreement between Great Britain and France, and we kind of got stuck in the middle of that, right? If you remember that from our story, from our knowledge story. The next picture here is has to do with Christopher Columbus. And I think, if I remember right, you learned about Christopher Columbus in kindergarten or first grade. But in 1942 is when Christopher Columbus sailed from Spain. He was an explorer, and he was sent there to look for a quicker route from India to China because they were wanting to trade their goods. So that was kind of his intent. Well, Columbus had thought that he reached India um, when in actuality he had landed in North America. So when he first saw the people here, he thought of them, he named them Indians because he thought he was in India. Okay. And then they made many voyages thereafter to the United States. Let's see. I don't have an individual picture of Christopher Columbus. I was hoping I did, but that's okay. So, when people heard about Christopher Columbus and his travels, they set off across the ocean as well to this new world that he had discovered. And there were many explorers from the European countries, including France and England. And these people became known as the Pilgrims. And this is a picture of them here. And the Pilgrims were a group of people from England, okay, which later became Great Britain. And they sailed to America on a ship called the Mayflower to try to start their new life. So this is kind of when everybody first started to come to the United States. And then we have a picture here of the Revolutionary War. The Revolutionary War took place when America's 13 colonies fought for their independence from Great Britain. Remember, when we're talking about being independent, that means we want to be free of control. Okay, we don't want anyone controlling us. The independence means you control yourself. So the colonies wanted to be able to make their own rules. They didn't want to have to pay taxes to Great Britain, and the United States did end up winning the Revolutionary War. And turning the page here, we get to the American government. Okay, these two documents probably look very familiar to you. The early colonists really wanted to govern their nation differently than the way Great Britain was governed. And if you remember talking about ancient Greek civilizations, we discussed how one of the contributions from the Greeks was the idea of democracy. And that in the end was what the United States ended up adopting. So you see the Declaration of Independence, that's on this side right here, kind of a light colored document. And that was signed on July 4th of 1776. And it was when the United States declared their independence from Great Britain. The signing of the Declaration of Independence is celebrated on the 4th of July in our country. And it lists the natural rights that the founding fathers believed that all people should have. Okay. Just kind of scanning down here really quickly. These are the four founding fathers: George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. And I will come back down to them in just a second. Back up here to the kind of darker colored document. This is the Constitution of the United States, another very important document. It is the highest law in the United States, and it shapes the laws that affect a lot of American life. Okay. It starts with "we the people," meaning that it's meant to represent the people of the United States. And James Madison here, that gentleman, James Madison, was kind of the creator, the person who planned and wrote and shaped this Constitution. Okay. These four gentlemen, they became presidents of the United States. Remember, as presidents, they didn't have the power of a king. Previously, from Great Britain, there were kings and queens, and we kind of, when we moved to this country and started our own government, we didn't want kings and queens. So we decided to have presidents instead, and they are elected by the people. Okay, so you have to earn the people's vote in order to become the president. They were working to make big decisions, pass laws. They were also, again, part of a bigger group called the Founding Fathers. That means that they worked to create and sign the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, as I mentioned earlier. Switching over now to take a look at the British government. Let's see if I can zoom this back out. We have a full slide here. So the British government, this is King George III, and then this is a picture of something called Parliament. Okay, so Great Britain had a very different form of government than the United States. The King of Great Britain was not elected to his position, okay, as ruler. Instead, he became king because he was the son of a king. So the British people didn't have a choice in that matter. If let's pretend I was male. If I was male and I was a king, my son then would automatically become king when I passed away. Okay. So King George III ruled in Great Britain during the Revolutionary War and during the War of 1812. And he could make his own rules. He didn't have to get the permission from the people. The people didn't even have to agree with what he decided. It was what it was. And he made those decisions. And Parliament, which is the picture of this building right here, it's part of the British government that's responsible for making laws. So the king or queen is the head of the Parliament, and then the king or queen is the one who makes the final decisions regarding any laws. And they do not need the support of Parliament. Okay. Parliament is here to offer suggestions and to kind of guide the king or queen in the right direction, but ultimately the king or queen in power can decide those things for themselves. Taking a look at early colonial life. And again, feel free to pause whenever you guys need to, just to take a break, okay? Early colonial life. So when the United States was a young country, life was much different than it was today. We only were a country of 13 colonies. We did not have all of the states that we have now. And we came to live in this country because we wanted religious freedom from Great Britain. We wanted the freedom of not having a king and having a president, and a democracy where people decide decisions. And a lot of people were looking to make money. They were poor living in Great Britain, and this gave them an opportunity to be able to farm and become merchants and trade and make their own money. Okay. Down here, we have a picture of a colonial farmer. So people living in the new country survived mainly through agriculture, meaning they needed to farm from the land. This is a new country. It was a long time ago. You couldn't just run to the grocery store if you needed something. So people had to learn to live off the land. Here is a picture of an American port. And if you remember, a port is like a body of water where larger boats can come in and dock, and then people merchants like these two gentlemen, can ship and trade and sell their goods and services. Okay. This type of trade was really important for making money and also receiving goods. Living in the United States, there were certain things that we couldn't produce agriculturally that other countries could, such things as cocoa beans and things like that. So trade was really important to us. One more picture down here. Westward expansion. So we just finished westward expansion not too long ago. And this was the idea that over time, people began to move further west. The 13 colonies got a little bit what they considered overpopulated. People wanted to move to own their own land and be able to farm and make money as much as possible. So pioneers, that's what we called people who were moving west, looked to move out west and try to set up a new life for themselves. They met Native Americans that were already in some of those western areas. And unfortunately, a lot of times they were removed from their hometown or their village and asked to move somewhere else. I think you probably remember talking about Indian Territory and the Trail of Tears, where the tribe was in Georgia was asked to move by the president and move on a trail that was really just very devastating to them. They didn't have enough supplies, and they were having to move to Indian Territory, which is now the state of Oklahoma. But as people started to move west, remember that then they started to move into Oklahoma and other areas, thinking about the Oregon Trail and killing buffalo, the expansion of the railroad. So all of those things played into westward expansion. Okay. All right. So now we have a little idea of those things that were leading up to the War of 1812. And I have created a timeline for you that we'll talk about next time we get together. And it'll kind of, sorry, and it will break down a little bit of that for you, a little bit more, break down kind of these different events that we're going to talk about. I can zoom out here so you can see that. So the War of 1812 is what our whole book is about. And we're going to go through a timeline that's really going to kind of break this down, talk about these individual pictures and how these things happen through history. Okay, so we'll see you next time.